Okay, I'm out of practice. Okay, here we go. This lesson can actually be a couple day lesson. I'm not sure. We'll have to see how long it takes. But there's a lot of information to cover in this section, so I want to hit it and make sure we get it all covered for you. First off, a quick review. I know we've been gone for a couple of weeks, but the life of Moses. Okay, Moses. We aren't exactly sure of his timeline. Time frame could be anywhere from about 1600 BCE to about 1100 BCE, somewhere in there. So a span of 500 years. Now, life of Moses in the first 80 years. That's what we covered last week. And he was hidden by his parents in the reeds, discovered by a princess of the Pharaoh, raised in the Pharaoh's court for the first 40 years before he took off after he saw an Egyptian he killed an Egyptian and then escaped. He worked in Midian for 40 years, and then he met the God Yahweh at a burning bush. And that's where we left it last week. Okay. Now, Yahweh asked Moses to go back and free the Jewish people. Now, again, the evidence of this, archaeologically speaking, is very slight. There's not a lot of evidence. In fact, no evidence. We can't pinpoint Moses' life to any particular pharaoh or time frame. Some people theorize that Moses would have been more than one person as well. And so Moses is very difficult. Now, was there something about Moses that is real? I think so, because the Jews have these stories built around him. Now, the stories are highly mythological. A lot of things you have to take by faith, but there's something there that influenced their culture. And so we have to take it seriously and see how it works out. Now, Moses came back to Egypt, and he demanded the Pharaoh let the people go. Now, there's a video called Exodus Decoded. I used to show it in my class a little bit here and there, but the more I've seen it, the more concerned I am about its content, because there's a lot of gaps and a lot of logical lapses in that video. But in Exodus Decoded, his main thesis was that the Exodus could have been caused by natural occurrences. And he had to tie it to this place called Santorini. Now, Santorini ties in with Greece and the Minoans, and we'll look at that coming up in our class. But Santorini, also the volcano Thera. So it's the island of Santorini, and the volcano that was on the island called Thera. It erupted about 1650 BCE. And it was a huge eruption. And that eruption probably destroyed the Minoans, and it affected the Egyptian civilization as well. Now, the 10 plagues, we have water turns to blood. And on this, it gives you the actual Bible verses that talk about it. The next one was the amphibians. There's a plague of frogs. So frogs take over. Gnats and lice. So frogs jumping over the place to get lice on people. And we talked about lice before with Egypt and how the Egyptians would shave their heads. Then we get flies. Then we have the livestock start to die off. Then people get boils on their skin that don't heal. There's this other plague of hail, ice, and fire mixed together that fall on the land. Locusts come down. And if you're in science, you should talk about locusts. It's kind of interesting. And then darkness, where there's a dark day or two. And then the last plague is where the firstborn are all killed. And that's just of the Egyptians. Now, those 10 plagues give rise to what's called the Passover, because in the Jewish tradition, the Jews were passed over by the angel of death. They painted lamb's blood on the door frame, and they also stayed up and ate a late night dinner of simple food, and that kept them alive. All the Egyptian firstborn were killed, and that was that. So after these 10 plagues, what happens is Moses comes to the Pharaoh before each of the plagues and says, "Let my people go, or you're going to have a plague." The Pharaoh says no 10 times, and then once the firstborn are killed, the Pharaoh relents and lets the Jewish people leave. Now, The Jews leave Egypt. And this is a very difficult time to look at because, again, we don't know exactly when it happened. And 40 years in the desert, some people will take that as a metaphor. And as you look at the Bible, if you ever look at the Bible, there are numbers that show up again and again and again. 3, 7, 12, 40, even 10 is a number that shows up quite a bit. 7 is seen as a perfect number, a biblical number. 12, we got the 12 apostles. We have the that. We have the 12 tribes of Israel. There's several things like that as well. Now, 40 is often seen as a metaphor, and so we aren't sure. But it took the Jews 40 years to travel from Egypt to Canaan. Now, if you look at it as the crow flies, it looks like about 225 miles, 250 miles, somewhere in there. They did not go that way, perhaps. In fact, there's 3 different routes. They could have taken a route on the north side that follows the sea. They could have followed the central route that comes down and then cuts across, or they could have followed the outline of the Sinai Peninsula down and up. So there's no real clear case or clear evidence of where they went. Now, one of the miracles that's associated with the Exodus is called the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, this again is disputed because they don't know exactly where it would have happened. Now, crossing the Red Sea, this is the Red Sea down here, or this is the 2 gulfs of the Red Sea. So most people look at that area. But in the Bible, it describes that the Jews had lined up on the shore, and the Pharaoh had changed his mind once again and was coming down with his army to attack the Jewish people. Now, at that time, God created a miracle where he cut the Red Sea, gave the Jews a dry path where they could walk across. Now, some people claim it is up here, a small lake called the Sea of Reeds, or the Reed Sea, and they crossed there. This map has it over here on the Gulf of Aqaba. This is the first time I've seen it over here on the Gulf of Aqaba. And so what you see here is you see a lot of different assertions where people will say it was here or there or somewhere else. The Gulf of Aqaba, okay, if they had crossed the Sinai Peninsula and came across here, it would be fascinating to see what happened. Now, again, people will take time to find biblical archaeology, and you'll find a lot of people who claim to have discovered evidence of the crossing of the Red Sea. As far as I know, that evidence has not been substantiated ever. That doesn't mean it won't ever be substantiated, but I have not seen it where it has. Someone comes up with it and says, yes, this is it, and they substantiate it. Another part of the story is the location of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is a location where Moses was supposed to have seen the burning bush. Okay. And it's also a location where Moses gets the laws of God. Now, Mount Sinai is anywhere from down south in the Sinai Peninsula to further up in the Sinai Peninsula. But again, this map puts it across into Saudi Arabia on the median side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, there's a lot of information there that we can't really sort out. But the Exodus talks about a population of about, the Bible says, I think about 1 million people, or alludes to that. But real estimates are anywhere from about 15,000 Jewish people to about 2 million Jewish people. And it took them 40 years to cross the desert. Now, crossing the desert that is only 125 miles across, or 225 miles across, it shouldn't take 40 years. Many people who believe the Bible say it was more of a generation, that the people, that God didn't want any of the people who had worked as slaves in Egypt to survive. He wanted them to die off, and so they would come out with a new culture on the other side. There are only 2 or 3 people, and I have to look their names up, but I think, was it Joshua? Joshua's, I think, one of them that survived the crossing of the desert. But other than that, all the other people died off, even Moses and his brother Aaron. Their traditional burial grounds are on the Jordan side of the Dead Sea. So the 40 years, there's a lot of things to ask questions about here. 40 years in the desert, the Exodus. But the most important part about this Exodus is this is where Judaism becomes a unique religion that is primarily just that Jewish religion. Now, it does have influence from other areas as well. Now, Mount Sinai. As they crossed Mount Sinai, Moses ascended the mountain and he met with God again. And the first time he was up there for, I'd have to say about a month or two. But the people thought he had died up there, and so they were debating whether to go back to Egypt. In that time frame, they created a little Apis bull of their own, a golden calf, and they began to worship it. And when Moses came down and saw the people worshiping the golden calf, he took the 10 Commandments, 2 tables of stone, and broke them physically to show how they had broken the 10 Commandments of God. Now, 10 Commandments, if you look at them here, it says, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no idols, and you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and keep the Sabbath day holy." The Jews have some very interesting holidays or holy days. Okay, the Sabbath is where they would celebrate or worship God from sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday. They would not do any work, all that stuff. So you see the first 4 of the 10 Commandments relate to worship of God. And the second one is, do not take the name of God in vain. That is where they dropped the vowels out of Yahweh. And so we don't really know what the true pronunciation of Yahweh is because they would try to avoid that. Now, the next 6, honor your father and mother, no murder, no committing adultery, no stealing, no lying or bearing false witness, and no coveting. So you can't even want something. The 10th commandment is interesting because it is very similar to the Buddhist precepts of wanting. And if you remember Buddhism, okay, in Buddhism, they talked about how desire was the only sin. So if you wanted something, that was the sin. And so it's interesting to see that in Judaism, desire or wanting, coveting something that's not yours is also a sin. So there are some similarities. Now, let's see. The 10 Commandments are very similar to, well, we saw Hammurabi pass down the law code, and now we have Moses passing down his law code as well. People that established the laws seem to have a significant impact on other people. Now, Levitical laws. So the 10 Commandments, those are the same commandments in Christianity and Islam as the Jewish 10 Commandments. But the Jews go further and they define their 10 Commandments in Levitical laws. Okay, the book of Leviticus is one of the books of the Torah. There are 5 books in the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And they create the basic Jewish beliefs. For example, now Sabbath keeping. Okay, here it says no work. So you can't do any work on that Sabbath day. In Leviticus, it defines what work is. For example, it says you cannot light a fire on the Sabbath because lighting a fire is work. And so there's no cooking on the Sabbath. You got to create your food before the Sabbath happens, so that before Friday night. In the Exodus, they talked about a food called manna. Manna was a bread that would drop from heaven, and it would drop double amounts during the Exodus on Friday nights. So you could pick up twice as much manna on Friday night to get you through Saturday. But if you did that on any other day, the manna would rot. Okay, but Saturday it wouldn't rot. So no cooking, lighting fires on the Sabbath. Another thing, when it came to work, you couldn't tie your shoes on the Sabbath. I'll take that back. You could tie your shoes if you could do it with one hand. Okay, because if it takes 2 hands to tie it, that is now considered work. And so one-handed shoe tying or sandal tying would be accepted, but two hands not accepted. And so Leviticus goes through all these laws and further defines the Ten Commandments. Each one, okay, what is it? What is coveting? What is stealing? What is murder? All those things. Now, they also go into what's called dietary laws. And if you have noticed, some foods will be called kosher. Now, the dietary laws they don't really come across to the Christian religion as much, but they do go into Islam. For example, Muslims and Jews will not eat pork. Okay, that is a meat that is not clean. They defined meat that was clean. I think the animal had to chew its cud and have a split hoof. And so if you had a split hoof, horses are out. Can't eat horse. Can't eat dogs. Can't eat rabbits because they don't have hoofs. And so they would define what animals were clean to eat. A fish had to have fins and scales. So you can't eat shellfish, no lobsters, no clams, no catfish, no bottom feeders. And so the dietary laws are another thing that the Jews use to define their religion. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but every one of these laws of the Ten Commandments would have further definitions of what was accepted and what was not accepted. Okay, also on the crossing of the Red Sea, or in the Exodus, Moses was told by God how to build a tabernacle, a place to worship. Now, in these pictures, it shows the tabernacle. It has a little cloud above it. During the day, the Jews believed that a pillar of fire would lead their way at night, and a cloud would lead their way at daytime. And so this cloud above that tabernacle is symboling the presence of God. Okay. Now, just like the Egyptians, the tabernacle was not meant for normal people. You and I could not go in there. It was just for the priests. Now, in Judaism, you had to be from the tribe of Levi to be a priest. So anyone who was a descendant of one of the 12 brothers named Levi, those people would be available to be priests. Now, the high priest under Moses was his brother Aaron. And this tent that they built, and I haven't gone through and looked at the dimensions, but everything was defined by God. And I think it even gives your Bible verses on that smaller picture there I have on there, what it would look like. So that outer wall courtyard, and the height of the walls were prescribed by God according to Moses. The tent in the middle was prescribed by God. The designs on the fabric were prescribed by God. But then the altar, the different locations, a place where they'd wash, a place where they'd have the bread for sacrifice, the candelabras, all those things were defined by God. In the very back, okay, so you have three different areas. You have the courtyard outside the tent, and then there's two rooms inside the tent. The first room is a holy place. Priests could go in there, but only the high priest could go into the back room, and that was called the Holy of Holies. Now, in the Holy of Holies was this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. If you ever seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, that is the Ark they're talking about. Okay, and only the high priest could go back there. I believe in Moses' time, it was Moses and Aaron who could go back there, but no one else. Now, when they traveled, they would take the Ark of the Covenant out, and they would transport it. And there's a lot of mythology associated with the Ark of the Covenant, where you wouldn't touch it, see it, because it was dangerous to people who were not the high priest. And so I believe they'd cover it, and only certain people could carry the poles that carried the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, if you look at it too, it has a couple of angels on the top. Their wings are doves. I think they're either birds or angels on the top. And their wings would come across and touch. And then the 10 Commandments were housed inside the box of the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant is God's covenant to make the Jewish people a great nation, as long as they kept those 10 Commandments. and that's why it's called the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. Now, the Ark of the Covenant. It is fascinating. So it contains the Ten Commandments. Now, it was lost. I hate to say it. We're going to be looking at how and when it was lost. But about the year 600 BCE, the Ark of the Covenant was lost track of. And we'll look at that when we come up to it. But there are people who claim to know where it is still. One location is in Aksum in Ethiopia. There's a church, St. Mary of Zion Cathedral, and in the back of the church, there's a room that only the high priest can go into, and the high priest has access to the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, but about 600 BCE, and I'll give you the real dates when we get there, the Jews were attacked, the temple was raided, and they believed that the Ark of the Covenant could have been moved down into caves underneath the temple. And they lost track of it now. Now, in current days, the Muslims have the Dome of the Rock built on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so there's no access to the caves down beneath it. If there are caves or not, there's no way to get there without violating the Muslim religion. And so people are not doing that. Now, the way it may have made it to Ethiopia is one of the kings, King Solomon. He is reputed to have 300 wives and 1,000 concubines. One of his wives may have been a woman known as the Queen of Sheba. And Sheba was a country down at the southern end of the Red Sea that spanned across from Ethiopia to Yemen. And when he married her, and he actually had a son with her, I believe, but he sent the Ark of the Covenant south with her. Even though I think Aksum is probably the right location, okay, there's no, yeah, they do have archaeological proof, and I'll go through that later on too. It's difficult to say if that is where it is or not, or if it still exists. Some people think it may have been destroyed at some point. We'll never know. Okay, that didn't take as long as I thought, but there's a lot of information here. So we might spend a couple days on this. I'm not sure quite yet. We'll look at it. But here's your question. If you're going to check Mr. T's accuracy on this presentation, what would you do first? Okay, where would you go to check my accuracy? And what would be your second step? Okay, we haven't talked about this very much, but you should look at it. We'll talk about it later. There are my sources. Take a look at those, and I hope you enjoy everything. Take care, everybody.